So welcome to the recap of the second session of the RuneQuest project campaign, set in Sartar in 1620. And I suppose I should start with recapping the previous recap just to set the scene. And the scene is Apple Lane, and we've just defended Gringles pawn shop against an attack by inhuman forces. We were commissioned to defend against baboons, but in the eventuality we found ourselves facing off against baboons, against dragon newts, a centaur, a duck, but only very briefly, and a great troll. And when the curtain came down on the first session, we had either killed or captured everybody. No one had escaped. The baboons had attacked by the back door, forced their way into the kitchen. There was a bloody fight in the kitchen. There is blood all over the floors. The kitchen is awash with blood. Baboons had caved in the ceiling, if you remember from the previous session. And we managed to capture two baboons. One of the leaders, and the other one got hit by his mirror, our Minotaur healer's sleep spell, so they are bound up. One of our characters, Scala, has been hugely hurt, badly damaged. So his mirror, Scala, and his mirror's sidekick are all off sorting Scala out. Meanwhile, at the front door, we find Mr. Grip, who has possessed a dark troll, and between Mr. Grip and what's her name, Neve, we've managed to dispatch the attacking forces comprising of the dragon newt and the dragon newts and the duck at the front door. Neve was placed outside during the attack to provide covering fire and shoot, basically attack the attackers from the rear as they came in for the attack. So yes, and the important thing to note is that Mr. Grip had discorporated and is now possessing the Great Troll. This is where the curtain raises on the second session. I'm at the front door, and instead of trying to beat the door in, I'm knocking relatively politely, saying, "Let me in, Mr. Grip, friend, let me in, fighting finished, let me in." When out of the darkness an arrow comes flying, thonk, into my abdomen, does some damage. Mr. Grip sort of turns around and yells out to Neve, because that's who shot the arrow, "Friend, stop it, friend!" And of all the things Neve may have expected when she shot a great troll with an arrow, she did not expect the great troll to tell her to stop it and announce himself as a friend. So she holds her fire. My shouting attracts the attention of Gillette, our Grazelander Humacti, and he comes trotting around the corner on his horse, sees this great troll, who gives him a cheery wave and goes back to knocking on the door. And this also perplexes Gillette. And out of the darkness comes Neve, and they spend a bit of time talking to each other about how perplexed they are at this peculiar behaviour by this great troll, who was attacking the door, then attacked his colleagues, and is now knocking on the door. In the fullness of time, the door opens, and because one of the other defending characters had heard this and figures something odd's going on, but it must be safe enough. And I can't remember whether it's Oisin or Calond. Oisin and Calond are cousins. Oisin's a noble, Calond's a warrior. And yeah, Mr. Grip just can't tell them apart. But then, in all fairness, Mr. Grip can't tell any humans apart because, well, all humans look alike. So the door opens, in comes Mr. Grip, in comes Neve and Gillette, and in comes, well, both Oisin and Calond are there. And by this stage, I sort of come to realise that me crying out "Mr. Grip, friend" wasn't actually necessarily having the effect I wanted, so I changed that to "A friend of Mr. Grip, friend of Mr. Grip, which I would have thought would have been obvious to the meanest intelligence that I was in fact a friend. But they're still a little bit jumpy. They're not too sure what to make of this great troll. And so, because you see, I've got a plan here, I've got a cunning plan. So to expedite the whole situation, I say, right, tie me up. And that, I have to say, didn't actually quite have the effect I was hoping it would have, because because what happened next is this big conversation about whether or not their ropes were able to hold them, and there's a strange reluctance to actually tie me up. So in the end, however, I got tied up. Once that's done, I stride off into the depths of Gringles' pawn shop, which finally convinces the band members that he must be one of the good guys, because the only people who ever get to have a look inside Gringles' pawn shop are Gringles' very, very closest of friends. And yet this great troll is navigating his way to wherever he wants to go absolutely perfectly without a problem. And where the great troll wanted to go was one of Gringles' storerooms. One of Gringles' storerooms that has a closet in it that has Mr. Grip's body in it. So he gets into the storeroom. The great troll announces to the remainder of the party, I might get a little bit shouty, I might get a little bit confused, just bear with me. Don't kill me. Mr. Grip then returns to his own body. I suppose since he discorporated to leave his body, he corporates back into his own body, comes out and immediately launches into this great troll, saying he's a very naughty boy, he should be ashamed of himself, what does he think he's doing, this is just not good enough, haranguing and harassing him in dark tongue for ages, really, really laying into him. So Ox asked me, our games master asked me to make a roll against my intimidate, which I do quite nicely, and then make another roll just to see what happens, and that works out quite nicely too. And over this period of harassment and intimidation, the great troll just starts to wilt and shrink into himself, and gets very bashful, and his bottom lip starts quivering, and generally finds himself being browbeaten into submission. Because after all, what is troll society but a society based on power, abuse, and the abuse of power. So, so this great troll is totally subdued. Excellent. I undo his bonds, and the great troll starts following me around like a puppy. I now have a great troll henchman. Fantastic. Just what I was. Yeah, just that was my plan. I enjoyed that. Then the rest of the party decides to better sort out all these dead bodies all over the place, and get them prepped and ready to receive the bounty on the baboons anyway. Now at this point in time, so they go back to the kitchen and start pulling all these dead baboons out of the kitchen to line them up outside. Someone starts collecting ears because they think that ears are probably the most efficient way to prove, proof of death. But in the end, they decide to just lay out these bodies, because Gringle's going to be back tomorrow. You might as well just leave them there. Why make more work for yourself? Laid out all these bodies. Now, it was during this process that that we had one of those little classic situations which happens when one of your characters speak the common language as a second language at around 30%. Because whilst everyone was pulling out all these dead baboons out of the kitchen, one of them asked Mr. Grip, can you look after these 2 baboon prisoners? Now, it's an understandable mistake. There's cultural nuances here. But you tell me, what is the difference between being asked to look after these baboons and being asked to take care of these baboons? And so that's exactly what Mr. Grip did. He took care of those baboons. Smack with his mace, A game over for those unfortunate creatures. This caused a little bit of consternation amongst the humans, and it was explained in no uncertain terms. That's not what was meant, but nonetheless, what's done cannot be undone. So might as well make the most of it. And after all, it's another couple of lunas in our pocket. So another 2 bodies were dragged out, lined up, all ready to receive our bounty. And basically, that's where the evening finishes. I'm actually curious. Unfortunately, the player who plays his mirror, Neil, wasn't there at the time, because if you think back, what has Mr. Grip done so far? He's zonked someone with a sleep spell. Now, what the hell is a non-Shalana Arroy person doing with a sleep spell? Not only did he use the sleep spell, he ended up killing the person the dragon newt that he put to sleep, which is just so abhorrent to Shalana Arroy attitudes and ideas. And he's just come in and killed a prisoner who'd surrendered, but then also killed the other prisoner who his mirror had zapped with a sleep spell. So yeah, so it's a real shame that Neil wasn't there, because I'm sure there would have been some interesting role-playing coming out of that, as his mirror objected rather strenuously to Mr. Grip's behaviour and attitude towards prisoners. So a lost opportunity. Hopefully that'll be picked up again somewhere along the line, because you can be sure as anything that's not isolated incident from Mr. Grip. That's trollish behaviour, and part of the reason of wanting to play a troll is explore and experiment with trollish behaviour. So anyway, back to the game. Dead bodies laid out. There's layout or the dragon newt party as well. So the 3 dragon newts and what's left of the duck. And I say what's left of the duck because there wasn't much left of it after a great troll took a 2-handed swing at it and hit it in the chest, I think it was. And thereafter, one of the other human players went round, gathered up all the feathers, and stuck it in a small sack, and now has a feather down pillow. Good on that man. So laid them out as well. Next morning, Gringle and Quickjohn return. Absolutely impressed at what happened and the lack of damage, apart from the collapsed roof that the baboons caused, and immediately start getting into negotiation about the bounty paid on the attacking villains. Gillette is our spokesperson, and so Gillette and Gringle have this ongoing discussion. Gringle's more than happy to pay up for the dead baboons. I can't remember how much that was per head, but refused to pay out for the Dragon Newt party, saying, no, it wasn't part of the original contract, I'm not going to pay out for that. But as someone pointed out, well, what were we supposed to do? Just let them break in anyway? But despite the fact that I thought that was a rather good argument, Gringle said, no, not going to do anything, not going to pay the bounty for the Dragon Newts. However, they look like they are, it looks like they're a band of brigands that the Lunas have got a bounty out on. So you may want to check out, there's a Luna garrison just up the road, go talk to them, they may be interested in it. In fact, actually, if you want, I'll pay you 100 Lunas per head and just get it done, says Gringle. Now, Gillette wasn't born yesterday, and he's mightily suspicious about the sudden turnaround about Gringle's generous offer to pay 100 Lunas per head for the Dragon Newt party, and he declines because he thought that was just more than a little bit suspicious. So we wake up the sheriff, because the sheriff is a local representative, of course, of law and order. And the sheriff says, right, nothing to do with me, but it does look like this party that the Imperial troops have got a reward out on. I'll just nip up the road and go get the local officer, and he can come and sort it out. So off he goes. We're sort of talking about the situation, and someone points out that, well, these guys are brigands, they're robbers, so surely they might have some loot somewhere, because that's what robbers do, they rob, and that's what brigands do, they brigandize, and so they must have some loot somewhere. One of the local Sartarites is a very good tracker, and fortunately, just fortunately, the three Sartarites are not only related to each other and have got an established relationship, they're all also avid, rabid even, lunar haters, and decide that that would be a good thing for them to do while the lunars come to town. They will go and track the brigands and see what they can find. So off they go, make a couple of good track rolls, they find the brigands' camp, search it, and to their surprise and consternation find that there's actually not much in the camp at all. A couple of bales of cloth, but that's about it. So having searched as good as they could, they turn around and come home. But they will arrive after the lunars have departed. So that's their sort of little mini adventure for the day. Back in Apple Lane, the lunars eventually arrive, but before they do, Mr. Grips sort of suddenly thinks, okay, so if this is the Dragonute party that has got the bounty out on them, and part of that Dragonute band is the Great Troll, then it's best not to have the Great Troll stomping around the village, because, well, questions might be raised and they might want to take him off. So Mr. Grip takes the Great Troll, Good Boy, and puts Good Boy in a storeroom and tells him to stay there and don't make a noise and go to sleep. Roll against that, roll very well, and that's exactly what Good Boy does. He goes to sleep, curls up, goes to sleep, and that's him not heard for the rest. Nothing's heard from him for the rest of the day. The lunar officer turns up with a file of legionnaires, and it is very obvious that he is a man of some important stature and dignity, and he's a person that Mr. Grip needs to take a lot of notice of and be very aware of him. The reason being is that he rides into town with iron armour on and an iron scimitar, so this is a man of some power and obviously of some danger too, as far as Mr. Grip is concerned. The officer himself is very dignified. He's obviously a noble career soldier. He has stature, he has authority, he has mana, he has dignity, and he's pleasantly affable. He's not arrogant. He talks professionally to people who are in the same profession as him, including Gillette. Gillette again is our spokesman, and the lunar officer, who I can't remember his name. I can't remember the lunar officer's name, but it's something along the lines of Maximus Perionitis. It's got this real Life of Brian vibe about it, and so I sort of expected to, wake up next morning to have Lune Ite Domum scrawled over the side of the sheriff's hut. The Lunars go home. But anyway, so they have this conversation. The lunar officer comes across as a good bloke, a professional soldier, a man's man, and an individual with much dignity, breeding, and so forth and so on. He's trying to be friendly with Gillette, and Gillette is sort of forced to walk that tight line between not being rude to him, but also not being friendly to him. So trying to keep this professional neutrality, which the lunar officer is making very, very difficult because he's just so friendly and affable. Then there comes time to discuss the bounty, and the lunar officer sort of says, yes, this is the band that we've been searching. This is the band that we have put the bounty out on. These are the dragon utes and followers that have been killing our patrols and slaughtering our troops. Yes, more than happy to pay the bounty on it. Mr. Grip is there just watching on. He has no interest in the bounty, but he's very curious about this lunar guy. And what ho, thinks Mr. Grip. Did I hear right? Did I hear that we have just killed a bunch of dragon utes and so forth that have been going around killing lunar patrols? And does that make them a hero to the local Orlanthe? How does that position us in terms of perceptions by the locals towards this group? Us. And what's going to happen next? This could end up being quite a sticky situation. So yeah, our party, our little band, has killed off a well-known lunar-hating, lunar-marauding group of effectively Sartarite patriots. This is not going to go down well in some quarters. Anyway, so they let's get back to the negotiation phase. The lunar officer says, yes, this is who we're after. However, there's supposed to be a great troll. What happened to the great troll? And this conversation goes on, and hats off to Gillette. He did this really, really well. It was a fantastic piece of role-playing. The Luna was pushing to try and find out what happened to this great troll. Where did the great troll go? And Gillette answered without lying, because of course as a Humakti, he hasn't got the geese don't lie, but you know, Humakti don't like lying at the best of times. So he didn't lie, but at the same time he didn't lie by omission either. And when the lunar officer was really pressing what happened to the troll, he sidestepped beautifully, absolutely seamlessly, and didn't dob the troll in, even though there was lots of opportunity, lots of encouragement, and also, quite honestly, Gillette knows the value of a silver or two, and by not dobbing in the great troll, we lost out, or he lost out, or the party lost out on 250 lunars. So, but he stuck his ground, role-played brilliantly, didn't dob the troll in, and in the end, instead of getting 1,000 lunars for the Dragon Ute band, only got 750, but yeah, but fantastic role-playing. The officer then leaves, but before he leaves, he makes the comment that it's really good to have a professional band of mercenaries nearby, and he's sure that acquaintances will be renewed in a professional capacity in the not too distant future. So yes, that's the situation we find ourselves in at the end of the second session, which took about 3 hours, maybe 4 hours of role-playing. Not a sword was drawn. We have discovered that I believe we have discovered that we have decimated an anti-lunar freedom fighting force of some kind, and also that we find ourselves basically as some sort of lunar special operations task force. And I'm interested to sort of see how this is going to develop in the campaign, and how this is going to affect our relationship with the locals. I mean, for myself, Mr. Grip, who's a troll, and I shouldn't really have that much effect on what people think about him, because he's a troll and everyone hates trolls. And Gillette is an outsider, and his mirror is another non-human. So I think, you know, attitudes towards us may just be refined rather than changed massively. But then in the other half of the party, we have Oisin, we have Calond, and we have Neve. And they are Sartarites through and through. They're from the Grey Dog clan. No, sorry, they're from the Lismelda tribe, but I can't remember. A Good Sword clan, I think. But they are committed anti-lunar, pro-Sartar warriors. So how they're going to find the situation is going to be interesting, and see how they're going to roleplay it, and whether or not this possible divide between the outsiders in the party and the locals in the party, you know, how is that going to come through? How is that going to develop? Because, I mean, certainly as far as Mr. Grip is concerned, he hates chaos because he's a good troll, but he really has no strong opinion about the Lunar Empire because he really doesn't know anything about it. I mean, it's humans, and, you know, so beneath notice, really. So that's the situation. I'm curious to see what happens next session. I'm curious to see how this setup is going to translate into our adventures as we develop, and what influence it will have. And I've got no idea what session 3 is going to involve. I hope he'll give us a little bit of time. Mr. Grip has got a few things that he wants to sort out and do. He's got another plan underway, and would very much like the time and the freedom and the opportunity to develop and expand on that. So there we have it. The short session is now actually the longest recap I've done.